Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening a file that, honestly, it feels a little bit like reading a high-stakes political thriller.
It really does.
We are looking at the Indian national movement between 1905 and 1916. This is a crucial session of Simplified UPSC by PPP, and we are going to break down Chapter 15 of the Tamil Nadu Board Class History book.
And it really is a thriller. This is the decade where absolutely everything changes. If you look at the whole timeline of the freedom struggle, this is that distinct moment where the begging bowl, as they call it, gets smashed.
Right.
We stop asking politely. We move from the era of polite, well-worded petitions to the era of, roaring demands for swears.
We go from, please, sir, may I have some more rights, to
Wait,
get out.
That's it, exactly. We're moving from the moderates to the extremists, from the meeting hall right out into the streets.
We've got a lot of energy today because the stakes in this timeline are just incredibly high. But before we light the match on this particular powder keg, I have a very humble request for you, the listener.
A very important one.
It is. To keep this high-value content coming your way, and, honestly, to make sure you retain this information for your exams, please take a second and subscribe to the channel right now. It actually makes a huge, huge difference for us.
It really does. And if you are capable, and if you find real value in the deep analysis we provide, if this helps you connect the dots, please consider supporting us on Patreon. That support is, and this is not an exaggeration, it's the engine that keeps this whole thing running.
Absolutely. So a massive, heartfelt shout out to all our current supporters. You folks are the reason we can create this content. Also, please don't forget to like the video or audio and share your valuable comments. That engagement really helps us reach more learners just like you.
And one last thing before we jump in. For those of you looking for materials, we have free notes with practice previous year questions, or PYQs as you know them, and they're available on our public Telegram channel.
That's right. And for the serious aspirants who want the premium experience, we have a private Telegram library. It's got organized access to all the videos in this series, detailed premium notes, extra PYQs, and even model mains answers. You can just DM the public channel to get info on how to join. Okay. Housekeeping done, let's set the stage.
Let's do it.
We're looking at 1905 to 1916. The text calls this the Era of Extremism. But to really understand the surge, we have to understand what they were surging against. Who was running the show for the Congress before all this kicked off?
To understand the why, you absolutely have to look at the failure of the how. For 20 years, roughly from 1885 to 1905, the Indian National Congress was completely dominated by the moderates.
Okay.
These were figures like Dadabhai Naoroji, W.C. Banerjee, Firozeshah Mehta, great men.
This is the prayer and petition era, right?
Precisely. Critics, later on, they called it political mendicancy, basically begging. Now, these were brilliant men lawyers, intellectuals, most of them products of Western education, and they genuinely, truly believed in the British sense of fair play.
A sense of justice.
Yes, they thought if they just wrote a perfectly argued letter to London explaining how bad things were, that someone in the British Parliament would stand up and say, oh my goodness, we had no idea. Let us fix that for you right away.
Which, looking back on it from today, seems just incredibly naive.
It does now, of course. But you have to remember, they admired British democracy. They admired the institutions. Their initial goal wasn't even full independence. They wanted India to be governed like Britain, but still by Britain. They wanted self-government within the empire.
So what was the problem? What went wrong for them?
The problem was, after 20 years of this, what did they actually have to show for it?
Very little, I'm guessing.
Almost nothing. The Indian Councils Act of 1892 was their only, notable success, and even that was seen as a pretty hollow victory.
What did that act actually do?
Well, it expanded the legislative council slightly. It allowed a few more Indians in, but it gave them no real power. You could discuss the budget, for example, but you absolutely could not vote on it.
So you could complain about how your money was being spent, but you couldn't stop them from spending it.
Exactly. It was a debating society. So the younger generation, people like Tilak and Aurobindo, Ghosh, they're looking at this and they feel completely let down. They're seeing that the British aren't going to hand over freedom just because they're asked nicely. The entire method was failing.
So you've got this internal disappointment brewing. But it wasn't just happening in a vacuum, was it? The whole world was shifting at this time. I was looking at the notes on the Russo-Japanese War.
Oh, this is huge. Absolutely massive. 1904, 1905, you have Japan, a small Asian nation which had only recently modernized, going to war with Russia, a gigantic, sprawling European power.
And Japan wins.
And Japan wins, decisively. For people at the time, this was a psychological earthquake. The myth of European invincibility, the idea that the white man was inherently superior and unbeatable, it was just shattered.
I can't imagine what that must have
Yeah.
felt like.
Think about it. For a century, the entire colonial project was built on this narrative. We are European, we are superior, we are more advanced, and we are militarily unbeatable. And suddenly, an Asian country proved that's not true. It proved that an Asian nation could stand up to the West, use Western technology against them, and win.
So the Indian youth are reading about this in the newspapers and thinking, well, if Japan can do it.
Why can't we? And it wasn't just Japan. You also add to that the Ethiopian resistance against Italy. It's happening around the same time. The whole global narrative of white supremacy was starting to crack.
And this feels like a crucial point in the text. It wasn't just this external inspiration, it was also profound domestic misery, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The inspiration from abroad was the spark, maybe, but the tinder was right here at home. The text specifically mentions the famine and plague of 1896-97.
How bad was it?
It was devastating. We're talking millions of deaths. And while the masses were dying, what was the government's response? Apathy. Utter apathy. You had these grand durbars, these huge imperial celebrations happening while people in the countryside were starving.
That contrast must have been infuriating.
It created a deep, visceral anger. It wasn't an abstract political disagreement anymore. It was life and death. You see, the moderates were in their meetings asking for more council seats, while the people on the street were literally asking for bread. The disconnect was enormous.
And then, into this room full of gunpowder, walks the man with the match.
Lord Curzon.
Lord Curzon, the viceroy who seemed, I don't know, almost determined to provoke a reaction.
He was the archetypal imperial administrator. In his mind, he was making India more efficient for the empire. But in reality, every single one of his reforms was seen as an attack on Indian dignity and freedom.
His policies, when you list them out, they read like a checklist of how to anger an entire nation. Let's unpack them. The Calcutta Corporation Act of 1899.
Okay, so this was a direct attack on local self-government. What he did was reduce the number of elected Indian members in the Calcutta Municipal Corporation. He basically handed control over to the British officials.
And the message that sends is?
The message is, you are not fit to run your own city. We, the British, know better. It was deeply insulting.
Okay, then there's the Universities Act of 1904.
This one was quite insidious. Curzon was no fool. He recognized that Indian universities were becoming hotbeds of nationalism. Students were organizing, debating, reading nationalist literature.
Breeding grounds for trouble, from his perspective.
Exactly. So his Universities Act increased government control over the universities. He reduced the number of elected members in the university senates and gave the government the power to veto their decisions. He essentially tried to turn them into government departments.
The goal being to control what they learned and how they organized.
Precisely. To stamp out independent thought. To produce clerks, not revolutionaries.
And of course, to top it all off, the Official Secrets Act and the Sedition Act.
Classic tools of repression. Curbing the freedom of the press, which was very vibrant at the time, and making it easier to prosecute anyone for sedition, which basically meant criticizing the government. Curzon was systematically dismantling the few rights Indians had fought for.
I want to pause here and connect this directly to a previous year question, because this is why we're here, to link the text to the exams. We have a source, a mains question, that asks about how the decline of traditional artisanal industry in colonial India crippled the rural economy.
This is such a critical piece of the context for extremism. It's the economic backdrop to all this political anger. It wasn't just about hurt pride or a lack of council seats. It was about economic ruin.
So what was happening?
Well, you have to remember, for centuries, India was a manufacturing powerhouse. Indian textiles, for instance, were the best in the world. But British policy systematically destroyed this. They imposed high tariffs on Indian goods being sold in Britain, but they flooded the Indian market with cheap, machine-made goods from Manchester.
So the famous Indian weavers, the artisans, they were being wiped out.
Completely wiped out. And this is the crucial part. In Britain, during the Industrial Revolution, when artisans lost their jobs, they could go and work in the new factories. In India, there were no new factories to go to. The British didn't encourage industrialization here.
So where did these millions of unemployed artisans go?
They had nowhere to go but back to the land. They fell back onto agriculture, which was already overburdened. This process, often called deindustrialization, is what crippled the rural economy. It created massive poverty and desperation.
So this economic desperation provided the mass base, the fuel for the extremists.
Right. When leaders like Tilak and others later spoke of Swadeshi, of using Indian goods, it wasn't just a political slogan. It was a cry for economic survival for these millions of people in the crippled rural economies. It resonated because it was real.
That makes perfect sense. And that leads us directly to the spark that caused the final explosion. The one policy everyone knows Curzon for.
The Partition of Bengal in 1905.
This was Curzon's masterstroke, or so he thought.
He thought it was a brilliant move of political chess.
The official reason he gave was administrative efficiency. Bengal was just too big, too difficult to manage from a single center.
Which, to be fair, was technically true. The Bengal presidency at the time was huge. It included modern-day Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, and even parts of the Northeast. It was an enormous administrative unit.
But the source material and all historical analysis since is very clear that this was just an excuse. What was the real motive?
The real motive was to break the nerve center of Indian nationalism. Bengal, and Calcutta in particular, was the intellectual and political heart of the resistance. It was where the loudest, most organized voices were coming from. Curzon wanted to silence them.
So he literally draws a line on the map to divide them.
He does, but look at how he draws the line. He splits Bengal into two new provinces, East Bengal and Assam, which would have a Muslim majority, and the rest of Bengal, what we call West Bengal, which would have a Hindu majority.
Divide and rule, the classic imperial strategy.
Explicitly. He was playing the communal card. He wanted to drive a wedge between Hindus and Muslims, who until then had a shared Bengali identity and were fighting together against the British. He even traveled to East Bengal and told Muslim leaders that the new province would give them power and unity they hadn't seen since the Mughal era. He was openly trying to create a competing Muslim nationalism to counter the Indian nationalism coming out of Calcutta.
But it backfired.
Yeah.
Spectacularly. October 16th, 1905. The day the partition officially came into effect. What happened?
It was observed as a day of mourning across Bengal. Shops were closed, people fasted, thousands of people took a dip in the Ganga as a ritual of purification and marched on the streets singing a new song that would become the anthem of the movement, Bande Mataram.
And there's a beautiful detail in the text about the tying of Rakis.
Yes, this was an idea popularized by Rabindranath Tagore. The Rakhi is usually a symbol of the bond between a brother and sister, right? Well, on this day, Hindus and Muslims tied Rakis on each other's wrists. It was a powerful emotional symbol of unity. It was a message to Curzon. You can draw a line on a map, but you cannot divide our hearts. You cannot break our brotherhood.
The text mentions Gandhi's observation on all this. He said the partition was the moment of real awakening in India.
It absolutely was. It was the catalyst. It took the freedom struggle from being a concern of a small, educated, urban elite and turned it into a genuine mass struggle. It brought people out onto the streets in their thousands.
And speaking of that intellectual awakening, let's bring in another PYQ connection. There's a question in one of the source papers about a book called Desher Katha, written by Sakaram Ganesh Duskar.
Ah, yes, a very important book.
What's the connection here? Why is this book significant in this context?
The question analyzes a statement about the book. It says the book warned against the colonial state's hypnotic conquest of the mind.
Hypnotic conquest of the mind. That sounds like something out of science fiction.
It's a profound and very modern concept, isn't it? The idea is that the British didn't just rule by force, by the gun and the sword. They ruled by convincing Indians that British rule was superior, that it was benevolent, that it was for their own good, and that it was invincible. They tried to convince Indians that they were incapable of ruling themselves. It was a psychological hypnosis.
And Desher Katha was essentially trying to snap people out of this trance.
Exactly. It was a wake-up call. And the Swadeshi movement, which this book heavily inspired, was the physical manifestation of that awakening. It was about breaking that hypnosis. It was about Indians standing up and saying, we don't need your goods, we don't need your education system, we don't need your validation, and we certainly don't need your rule.
That is such a powerful concept.
Yeah.
Breaking the mental chains before you can even think about breaking the physical ones. And that leads us perfectly into the methods of this new movement. This wasn't just petitions anymore. This was the Swadeshi movement.
A completely new form of struggle. The entire toolkit of protests changed overnight.
And it was built on two ideas, boycott and Swadeshi, two sides of the same coin.
Right. It's a very simple and powerful idea. You boycott British goods, cloth from Manchester, salt from Liverpool, sugar, all of it. And you promote Swadeshi, which means of one's own country. You promote Indian-made goods.
But it went way beyond just goods, didn't it? The text is clear that they were boycotting government schools, courts, and even government-given titles.
This was the really radical part. It was a comprehensive program of non-cooperation. The idea was to make the British administration impossible to run. If you don't use their courts, their laws lose their power. If you don't attend their schools, they can't indoctrinate your children. If you renounce their titles, like Rai Bahadur, you reject their system of honor.
It's a total rejection of the colonial state's legitimacy.
That's exactly what it is.
And this is where the concept of national education comes in as a constructive alternative.
Yes. It wasn't enough just to boycott British schools. You had to provide an alternative. So people like Satish Chandra Mukherjee, through his Dawn Society, and others began establishing national schools and colleges.
What was different about them?
The curriculum was different. They wanted an education system that was, in their words, on national lines and under national control. They taught Indian history, Indian philosophy, and technical skills that would help build Indian industries. The goal was to create self-respecting citizens, not just clerks for the British administration.
The economic nationalism aspect was huge too. The text mentions the opening of Swadeshi textile mills, soap factories, even banks and insurance companies.
It was a huge burst of entrepreneurial energy. It was about self-reliance, Atmashakti. And connecting back to that PYQ about the Industrial Revolution, the source material explicitly mentions how machine-made British goods had ruined Indian weavers. Swadeshi was the counterattack. It was an attempt, however small, to revive those indigenous industries and provide employment.
There's another interesting PYQ link here from the same source paper, and it's about indigo cultivation.
Ah, yes. That's a fascinating one.
The question asks why indigo cultivation declined by the beginning of the 20th century. And the answer given is its unprofitability in the world market because of new inventions.
Synthetic dyes.
Right. German chemists had invented synthetic indigo, which was cheaper and better.
And this is a perfect illustration of the broader economic vulnerability that Indians were facing. For decades, Indian farmers in places like Bengal and Bihar were forced by British planters to grow indigo, often under brutal conditions. Their entire livelihood depended on this one cash crop for the global market.
And then, because of a scientific discovery in a lab in Germany, their livelihood just vanishes overnight.
Exactly. It shows how precarious their position was. They were at the mercy of global market forces they couldn't control. This volatility was another powerful reason why the Swadeshi call for a self-reliant domestic economy resonated so strongly. You can't trust an empire that treats your country as just a resource farm.
So the atmosphere is electric. The whole country is buzzing with these new ideas. Who are the leaders who are channeling this energy, who are riding this wave? The text introduces us to the famous triumvirate, Lal-Bal-Pal,
Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and Bipin Chandra Pal, the three key leaders of this extremist phase. And we absolutely must add Aurobindo Ghosh to that list, who was, in many ways, the philosophical and spiritual intellect of the movement.
Let's break them down, one by one. Lala Lajpat Rai, known as the Lion of Punjab.
He was a powerhouse in Punjab. He was instrumental in spreading the message of Swadeshi and boycott there. He was so effective, in fact, that the British deported him to Mandalay in Burma without trial. They feared his influence over the so-called martial races of the north. He connected the Swadeshi movement to a sense of Punjabi pride and self-respect.
And then the man who is often called the father of Indian unrest,
Bal Gangadhar Tilak, or Lokmanya Tilak, the one accepted by the people. He really is the central figure of this phase. He is the one who gives the movement its most powerful slogan, Swaraj is my birthright, and I will have it.
simple, direct, and incredibly powerful. No more petitions. It's a demand, a birthright.
Exactly. And Tilak was a master strategist. He understood the power of the media and the power of culture. He used his two newspapers, Kesari, which was in Marathi, and Maratha, which was in English, to spread radical nationalist ideas to the masses. But even more brilliantly, he used religious festivals.
The Ganapati and Shivaji festivals.
That's right. He took these traditional Maharashtrian festivals and transformed them into huge public gatherings for nationalist propaganda. It was a way to mobilize people that the British laws couldn't easily stop. You see, you could ban a political meeting, but could you ban a religious festival? It was a genius strategy for mass mobilization.
And the third member of the trio, Bipin Chandra Pal.
He was the great orator of the movement. He was from Bengal, and he traveled the length and breadth of the country, especially in the south, spreading the message of Swadeshi and boycott with incredible passion and fire. He was instrumental in making the movement a truly pan-Indian phenomenon, arguing that this wasn't just about Bengal's partition, it was about India's freedom.
Now, Aurobindo Ghosh is a fascinating character. The text says he started as a fiery extremist, but later retired to Pondicherry for spiritual pursuits.
Yes, his life had two distinct phases. But during this period, from about 1905 to 1910, he was the ideological anchor of the extremist movement. He was a brilliant writer and thinker. He argued that political freedom was the life breath of a nation. Without it, he said, any social reform or educational reform was meaningless. He brought a kind of spiritual nationalism to the forefront, arguing that India had a divine mission to fulfill.
So this brings us to the inevitable clash. You have the old guard, the moderates, and these new firebrands, the extremists, all within the same organization, the Congress. They clearly wanted very different things, didn't they?
Fundamentally different things. The ideological clash was profound. The moderates, as we said, wanted colonial self-government. Think of Canada or Australia at the time. They wanted to govern themselves on internal matters but remain a dominion within the British Empire. They still wanted the British umbrella, so to speak.
And the extremists.
They wanted Swaraj. And for them, Swaraj meant complete independence, absolute freedom from British control. They had zero faith left in British benevolence or fair play. They argued that you don't politely ask a robber to give back your stolen jewelry. You have to take it back by force if necessary. The methods had to be direct action, boycott, and mass struggle.
This tension, this deep ideological divide, it had to break somewhere, and it broke spectacularly at Surat. But just before we get to the split in 1907, we have another major player entering the scene in 1906.
The All India Muslim League, yes, this is a crucial development.
What led to its formation?
Well, a group of Muslim elites and landlords led by the Aga Khan met the viceroy, Lord Minto, in Simla. They argued that the system of elections in India as it was would always favor the Hindu majority and that Muslim interests were not being protected.
So they wanted special protections.
Yes. And then in December 1906 in Dhaka, Nawab Salimullah proposed the formation of a formal organization to look after Muslim interests. And so the Muslim League was born.
The text suggests the British were more than happy to see this happen.
Oh, they actively encouraged it. The British were alarmed by the growing power and radicalism of the Congress, especially during the Swadeshi movement where Hindus and Muslims were fighting together. The formation of the Muslim League fit perfectly into their divide and rule strategy. They now had a counterweight to the Congress.
And the League scored a big political victory quite early on, didn't they?
They did. In the Morley-Minto reforms of 1909, they successfully secured the demand for separate electorates for Muslims.
Can you explain what separate electorates means? It's a term that comes up again and again.
It's a very important and very consequential concept. It meant that in certain constituencies, only Muslims could stand for election, and crucially, only Muslims could vote for those candidates. It essentially created a separate political identity. Instead of candidates having to appeal to all voters in an area, a Muslim candidate only had to appeal to Muslim voters. It institutionalized communalism in Indian politics. It was a poison pill that would have tragic consequences down the line.
Okay, so that's 1906, the League is formed. Now let's go to 1907. The Congress gathers for its annual session at Surat, on the banks of the river Tapti.
The infamous Surat Split. It was dramatic. The whole session was filled with tension from the start.
What was the core conflict?
The conflict was about the future direction of the movement. The extremists, led by Tilak, wanted to pass resolutions to extend the Swadeshi and boycott movement to the rest of India, take it outside of just Bengal, and they wanted to make it a full-fledged political mass movement aimed at achieving Swaraj.
And the moderates? What was their position?
The moderates, led by Firoza Mehta and Gopal Krishna Gokhale, were terrified. They wanted to confine the Swadeshi movement to Bengal. They felt the extremists were going too far too fast. They feared that a nationwide movement of open confrontation would lead to massive government repression and would destroy the Congress, which they had painstakingly built for 20 years. They wanted to stick to constitutional methods.
So what happened at the session itself?
Chaos. Absolute chaos. There were disputes over who would be the president of the session. The extremists wanted Lal-Bal-Pal. The moderates wanted Rash Behari Ghosh. When the session began, there were shouts and countershouts. The text mentions that eventually things got physical. A shoe was thrown at the stage, hitting both Firoza Mehta and Surendranath Banerjee. Chairs were thrown. It was a complete breakdown.
And the result was a formal split.
Yes. The session broke up in disorder. The moderate leaders then held their own separate meeting and formally expelled the extremists, Tilak's entire group, from the Indian National Congress.
That seems like a complete disaster for the nationalist movement.
It was a total disaster. United, they were a growing force. Divided, they were weak. And the British government seized the opportunity immediately. With the Congress split, they came down on the extremists with an iron fist.
A crackdown.
A massive crackdown. Tilak was arrested in 1908 and sentenced to 6 years of exile in Mandalay. Aurobindo Ghosh was also arrested, and though he was acquitted, he decided to escape to the French territory of Pondicherry and renounce politics. Bipin Chandrapal briefly retired from active politics. Lal-Bal-Pal went abroad. The movement was effectively rendered leaderless.
The safety valve, the theory that Congress was created to let off steam harmlessly. It hadn't just let off steam, it had completely exploded.
It had. But the thing is, when you suppress a mass movement, when you crush open political activity, the energy doesn't just disappear. It changes form. If you block a river, it doesn't stop flowing. It finds a new path, or it floods.
And that brings us to the next, much darker phase. The rise of what the text calls revolutionary terrorism.
Yes, though many historians now prefer the term revolutionary nationalism. The idea was that when open, peaceful politics was crushed, the youth of the country went underground. They came to the conclusion that violence must be met with violence. Their new mantra was, if you won't let us speak, we will make you listen with the sound of a bomb.
And we see these revolutionary groups popping up all over the country. In Bengal, the text mentions the Anusilan Samiti and the Jugantar group.
In Maharashtra, you had the Abhinavbharat Parat Society, started by the Savarkar brothers. In Punjab, there were figures like Ajit Singh. It was a widespread phenomenon.
And it wasn't just confined to India, was it? The movement went global. The text mentions the Ghadar Party in the USA and Canada, led by Lala Hardia, and India House in London.
Absolutely. Shamji Krishna Verma's India House in London became a hub for Indian revolutionaries abroad. People like Madan Lal Dhingra, who assassinated a British official there, they were smuggling arms back to India, learning how to make bombs, and publishing revolutionary literature that they would sneak into the country. It was a global network of resistance.
I want to zoom in on the Tamil Nadu connection here because the source material is very specific about this. We often hear about the revolutionaries in Bengal and Punjab, but the South was burning too.
It absolutely was. Tamil Nadu had a very vibrant revolutionary scene that is often overlooked. The text mentions the Bharatha Matha Association, which was founded by a young revolutionary named Nilakanta Brahmachari.
This leads to the Vanchinathan incident, a very famous event in Tamil history.
A tragic, violent flashpoint. In June 1911, a member of this association, Vanchinathan, assassinated Robert William Ashe, who was the British collector of Tirunelveli. The assassination took place at the Maniachi Railway Junction.
Why was Ashe targeted?
Ashe was notorious for his brutal suppression of the Swadeshi movement in Tuticorin. He had played a key role in the arrest and harsh imprisonment of nationalist leaders like V.O. Chidambaram Pillai.
And what happened to Vanchinathan after the assassination?
He took his own life on the spot in the station's lavatory. It was a political assassination born of desperation, a direct response to the government's repression. It sent shockwaves through the British administration in the South.
You mentioned V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, or VOC. His story is incredible.
He's known as the Kapalatia Thamisan, the Tamil helmsman. His story is one of incredible economic courage and nationalism. He did something no one had dared to do before. He started the Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company.
A shipping company. This was a direct economic challenge to the British monopoly, wasn't it?
A direct and very audacious challenge. He tried to run a passenger and cargo service between Tuticorin in Tamil Nadu and Colombo in Sri Lanka, a route dominated by a British company. The British fought him dirty. They slashed their ticket prices, at one point down to zero, offering free rides just to bankrupt him. The colonial administration harassed him and his business at every turn.
And eventually he was arrested.
Yes, on charges of sedition, and his treatment in prison was barbaric. He was a wealthy lawyer, a respected scholar, yet in prison he was yoked to an oil press, like a bullock, and forced to grind oil by hand in the intense heat. It was designed to break him physically and mentally. It's a heartbreaking but incredibly inspiring story of resilience against the full might of the empire.
We also can't talk about this period in Tamil Nadu without mentioning Subramania Bharathi.
The great revolutionary poet, Bharathiyar. His poems and songs, like Swadeshi Geethangal, Songs of Our Nation, were the fuel that powered the movement in the South. He was the editor of the nationalist magazine India. His writings were so fiery that he eventually had to escape to the French territory of Pondicherry to avoid arrest, where he joined Aurobindo Ghosh. Pondicherry became a safe haven for these revolutionaries.
I want to weave in another PYQ here from the source paper. There's a question about a journal called Vedel Vidvansak.
Ah, yes. The first monthly journal published for the untouchable people, as the question terms it.
The question is about who published it, Gopal Baba Wolankar. But why is this relevant to our discussion on the nationalist movement?
It's relevant because it highlights that alongside the political struggle for freedom from the British, there was a deep and complex social churning happening within Indian society. The text mentions the rise of the self-respect movement in Tamil Nadu a bit later on. You can't separate the political from the social. The big question in the era was, are we fighting for a free India that looks exactly like the old feudal caste-ridden India? Or are we fighting for a free India that is modern, just, and equal for everyone?
That's a great point. And the same PYQ paper also mentions the Rakmabai case of 1884.
The age of consent case.
Right. It revolved around women's rights, child marriage, and the restitution conjugal rights.
And this shows that Indian society was intensely debating its own structure while simultaneously fighting the British. Was the fight only against the external enemy, the British, or was it also against internal evils like the caste system and the oppression of women? These were not easy questions. The extremists, for instance, sometimes used conservative religious symbols to mobilize the masses, which alienated some social reformers. The revolutionaries, on the other hand, often had a more radical social vision. It was a complex time.
So we have this period of intense repression from about 1908 to roughly 1914. The movement is underground, the leaders are in jail or exile. But then a massive global event changes everything. World War I begins.
And just like that, politics returns to the surface. The British were now engaged in a life-or-death struggle in Europe. They were distracted. More importantly, they needed Indian cooperation. They needed Indian soldiers, Indian money, and Indian resources to fight the war. This gave the Indian nationalist leaders new leverage.
And this brings us to the next big phase, the Home Rule movement of 1916.
The war completely changed the equation, and two giants emerged to lead this new phase. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who was finally back from his long exile in Mandalay, and a new, powerful voice, Annie Besant.
And they started two separate Home Rule leagues, is that right?
Yes, they started two separate leagues, largely to avoid any friction between their respective followers. Tilak set his league up first in April 1916 at Pune. His area of focus was Maharashtra, Karnataka, the central provinces, and Berar.
And Annie Besant.
She set up her All India Home Rule League in September 1916, based in Madras. Her league covered the rest of India. She was an incredible figure, an Irish woman, a theosophist, who adopted India as her home and fought passionately for its freedom.
We have a specific PYQ from one of the source papers about Annie Besant. Let's try and decode it. It asks us to select the correct statements about her from a list.
Okay, let's look at the options. Statement 1. Was she responsible for starting the Home Rule movement?
Yes, absolutely. She and Tilak were the two main architects, so that's correct.
Okay, let's jump to Statement 3. Was she once the president of the Indian National Congress?
Yes, she was, in 1917. In fact, she was the first woman president of the Congress. That's correct, too.
Correct. But now look closely at Statement 2. Was she the founder of the Theosophical Society?
Ah, that's the tricky one. The text says she arrived in India in 1893 and took over the leadership of the society after the death of Colonel Olcott.
Exactly. The actual founders of the Theosophical Society were Madar Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott. Annie Besant became its most famous leader, but she wasn't the founder. That is a classic UPSC trap. They are testing your attention to the finest of details.
A very good catch. So the Home Rule movement is gaining steam, spreading the message of self-government across the country. And all this new pressure leads to a historic reunion.
The Lucknow session of the Indian National Congress in 1916.
This feels like a huge full-circle moment.
It is. A massive moment. Two major things happen here. First, the moderates and the extremists formally reunite. Tilak is welcomed back into the Congress after nearly a decade. The bad boys and the good boys, as they were seen, finally shake hands for the national cause. But even more significant than that was the Lucknow Pact.
This was the alliance between the Congress and the Muslim League.
Yes. For the first time, the Congress and the Muslim League signed a pact. They agreed on a set of joint constitutional demands to present to the British. In a very controversial move, the Congress formally accepted the principle of separate electorates for Muslims, but in return, they got a united front against the British.
Why did the Muslim League, which was formed to be loyal to the British, suddenly agree to work with the Congress against them?
A couple of reasons. The younger, more radical leaders were gaining influence in the League. But the main reason was World War I. Britain was fighting against the Ottoman Empire, and the Sultan of Turkey was also the Caliph, the religious head of Sunni Muslims worldwide. This angered many Indian Muslims and turned them against the British. So for a brief, shining moment, the stars aligned. It was the high point of Hindu-Muslim unity in the entire freedom struggle.
So by the end of 1916, the movement is united, it's organized, and it's loudly demanding home rule. It's a completely different picture from the disarray and repression after the Surat Split.
Absolutely. The stage was now set for the next and final phase of the freedom struggle, the Gandhian era. But none of that would have been possible without the fire, the energy, and the mass mobilization that was pioneered by the extremists during the Swadeshi movement. They proved that the masses could be a part of the struggle.
Before we wrap up the narrative, we have a special section today. We're calling it the Rapid Fire Round.
All right, let's do it.
The UPSC, as we know, loves to throw obscure historical terms at students. We found a list of these in the PYQ source papers. I'm going to throw a term at you, and you tell our listeners what it means in the context of Indian history. Are you ready?
I am ready. Fire away.
First up, Aurang. A-U-R-A-N-G.
Right. Aurang is a Persian word that means a warehouse. In the colonial context, it specifically referred to a place where goods were collected and stored before being exported by the East India Company. A treasury connection is also sometimes implied.
Okay. Next one. Banyan. B-A-N-I-A-N.
A Banyan was an Indian agent or broker who worked for the officials of the East India Company. They were the crucial middlemen who handled the business, the language, and the local customs for the British officials who often didn't know them.
Got it. How about Marasadar?
A Marasadar was, in essence, a designated revenue payer to the state. The term was most common in South India, and it often referred to someone who held hereditary land rights.
Let's go a bit further back in time, just for context, as these were all in the same question paper. The term paramitas.
Okay, this is from Buddhism. The paramitas are the perfections or virtues like generosity, patience, wisdom that one has to cultivate to follow the bodhisattva path to enlightenment.
Okay, another one. Hundi.
A hundi was a type of bill of exchange or credit note. Think of them as medieval or early modern checks. They were vital for facilitating long-distance trade in India, especially in the post-Harsha period.
And lastly, Kuyavapa and Dronavapa.
Those are units of land measurement from ancient India, specifically mentioned in inscriptions from the Gupta period.
So why does UPSC ask these kinds of questions? What are they testing?
They're testing whether you understand the deep structure of the past. History isn't just a list of kings and battles. It's about how society functioned.
Yeah.
How did people measure their land? How did they pay for goods across long distances? Who collected the taxes? These terms are windows into the economic, social, and religious life of the past.
Excellent. So let's bring it all together. We've gone on a journey from 1905 to 1916. What's the big picture?
The big picture is transformation. We saw the transformation of the Indian National Congress from a polite elite debating club into a genuine mass movement. We saw the weaponization of economics through Swadeshi and Boycott. We saw the tragic rise of revolutionary violence as a tactic when peaceful speech was denied. And finally, we saw a new level of political maturity in the reunion at the Lucknow Pact.
It's a journey of self-discovery for the nation. It's about finding its voice.
Precisely. A loud, demanding, and ultimately an unbreakable voice.
Now, as we always do, it's time for our final provocative thought. Something for you, the listener, to chew on.
Okay. The text we discussed mentions the safety valve theory, the idea that the British official A.O. Hume helped start the Congress to provide a safe, harmless outlet for Indian frustration to protect the British Raj. But by 1916, that safety valve had clearly exploded. So the question I want you to ponder is this. If the Surat Split hadn't happened in 1907, if the moderates and extremists had managed to stay united, would the British have been forced to concede power and leave India sooner? Or, conversely, did the radicalization of the movement, the violence, the chaos, and the fear that the extremists struck into the hearts of the administration, did that actually speed up the process by making the British realize that their position was untenable in the long run?
That is a deep what-if. A
Yeah.
fascinating question. Did the split delay freedom by a decade? Or did the fire of extremism ultimately make freedom inevitable and perhaps even faster? Something for all of you to think about.
Indeed.
Listeners, if you found this deep dive valuable, and we hope you did, please remember to subscribe, and if you can, support us on Patreon. We really want to keep bringing you these kinds of detailed insights.
And a huge final thank you to all our supporters. You are the absolute backbone of this channel.
Don't forget to like this and leave a comment below. What do you think about that final question? The Surat Split. A setback or a catalyst? Let us know your thoughts.
And remember, the free notes and all the PYQs are on the public Telegram channel. And for the full library of videos and premium notes, you can join the private Telegram group.
Until next time, keep learning.
Stay curious.